She's alive! Alive!
Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. It was founded by the prophet Zoroaster in ancient Iran approximately 3,500 years ago. Zoroastrianism is practiced in the following regions: small communities in western India, central Iran, southern Pakistan, as well as pockets of followers in Britain, Canada, and the United States. That quick note was important before going on with the video. I personally try to find things that I have not heard of or saw before. So with that, I bring you this. On January 19th, 2003, Indian officials ventured deep into the jungle, investigating several missing persons reports from a nearby city. What they found was called a Tower of Silence, or Dakma. Zoroastrians use these sites to dispose of bodies in the open air. While sites like these are not uncommon in certain parts of India, several peculiarities hint at something more unusual. Number 1, none of the bodies depicted in the photograph were identified. Villagers from nearby who were initially surprised at the sheer number of corpses in the Dakma proved unable to recognize the bodies. The corpses also did not match the descriptions of the missing people. Number 2, there were no animals except for maggots and flies. Zoroastrians rely on birds such as buzzards to dispose of the bodies in the belief that they are contributing back to the earth. Officials found the corpses relatively untouched by any sort of animal. Number 3, there is no official count of the bodies. In fact, little work was actually accomplished at the site, and perhaps this is the reason only one photograph has emerged. Officials avoided the spot not only because they felt uneasy looking at it, but for the following as well, which is also the fourth thing that was unusual. The deep pit in the center of the photograph was filled with several feet of festering blood. Far more than the bodies on the outside could ever supply. The stench was so unbearable, many of the officials began to get nauseous when they first approached the Dakma. The expedition was ended when a villager accidentally kicked a small bone into the pit, penetrating the coagulated surface of the pool. This is when a massive burst of gas from the decomposing blood erupted from the pit, splashing those looking into it. Along with the photographer Those caught in the explosion were immediately sent to the hospital, where they were quarantined for possible infection. They became delirious with fever, shouting about being tainted with the blood of the personification of evil in Zoroastrianism. Despite never having admitted they had any familiarity with the religion, in fact, many of them had no idea what the dogma was when they had found it. Delirium turned to insanity as many began to attack hospital staff until they were sedated. The fever eventually killed all of them. When officials returned with hazmat gear the following day, the site was empty. All the bodies had been removed, and astonishingly, the pool of blood in the pit had also been drained. And all that remained of the incident was this photograph. I love the woods. Rather, I love the woods in the daytime. It's beautiful then, when you can appreciate the life in the green leaves and the musty smells of slow rot and decay, giving birth to new life in the form of fungi and nutrients for insects. The forest in daylight just thrills me. I love watching bugs walk around on the wet forest floor, like shiny little organic robots, so keen to get somewhere without ever reaching their destination. I also love walking through wet leaves and finding an old jawbone from a raccoon or a fox. I love coming across rivers and skipping stones on them, catching frogs at their banks and searching for crayfish under rocks. However, I do not like the woods so much at night. I don't remember at what point this started. It's like any other fear, I guess. Irrational and easily explained away by science and psychology. It's not a fear of the dark because I love cities at night and even dark basements and attics. Places that usually scare the bejesus out of other people who dislike the dark. A fear of the forest is just a phobia that I've always had. I know it's a simple fear, and that a lot of people probably have it, but it feels so strangely special for me, if that makes any iota of sense. I've always felt uncomfortable in the woods at night. As far as I can think back to when I spent nights in my uncle's lakeside condo, or when I visit my grandma on my mom's side and have to sleep in her guest room. When I think about my fear of the woods, I just sort of pass it off and thank goodness I don't have to go there at that moment. Anyone would tell you that my phobia is just a simple case of raw, ancestral animal fear that I got from a traumatic experience. Or maybe that I inherited it. I almost wonder if maybe it's both. But I think it stems mostly from an old nightmare I used to have. When I think about it more, it wasn't just a nightmare. It was something much more profound, more uncomfortable, and even though I don't accept it, more real. It reminds me of the story of my boogeyman. Every kid has some silly, stupid monster that scares them shitless at a young age. My friend growing up had a monster she called Creeper that would open her bedroom door and glare at her all night. My little sister thought there was a ghost in the bathroom. And a lot of people I know are scared of something lurking in their hallway or wanting to pull them down a shower drain or something. Every kid can give you a ghost story, and every adult shivers looking back at them. Even though we all know they were just our imaginations running away with us. This is mine. This is the story of Dear Guy. Back when I was little, maybe 7 or 8, my grandparents bought a big house in a woodsy area in Michigan in the middle of nowhere. It was a beautiful place with lush pines and rolling mountainous hills and a shallow creek far in the back of their property. Like all forested places in Michigan, it took on this foreboding feeling of stifling coldness that just crushed around you from all directions at night. It almost felt like pure hatred was seeping out of the trees like sap. To make it worse, the guest room I stayed in had a big window that took up almost the entire wall. Looking out into the wide open yard outside in a way that no matter what time of the month, it always seemed like the moonlight illuminated it. There was a thing that I thought lurked outside the window in the night, but of course, it was never there, and I never saw it. I couldn't have seen it. But I knew what it looked like. It was a tall, naked man with the head of a deer. Nothing spectacularly horrifying, no. But the thought of turning my back to the window as it stepped purposely and fluidly like a deer steps across the glade and into the light of the moon to stop in front of the glass and stare at me with the cold black eyes of a stag made my blood freeze in my veins. It still does. So I watched the window at all hours of the night while I stayed with them, never daring to turn away, afraid to blink, my mind either reeling over the night terror or trying to distract myself from it. Small children are not incredibly articulate, so when I started thinking of him as Dear Guy, I did not really question how funny of a name it was for him. The simple title even added to his menace. Eventually, I would succumb to exhaustion, as young children inevitably do, despite the reserves of rambunctious energy. I remember that as my eyelids grew too heavy to stay open anymore, I would always see movement far, far off in the dark. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't even enough to arouse my suspicion. In spite of my watchful fear, I never even gave it a thought. Except for one time when I saw 2 green flashes in the dark. Like an animal's eyes in the light of the moon, peering out from in between the upward curving branches of a tree. I felt this sort of, I guess I could say, presence of complete hatred in the dark forest again, when my family decided to move out into the country to be closer to my mother's family. I had a room on the 2nd story of the home, which should have eliminated my fear of the line of trees and the cornfield that bordered our yard, but somehow made it worse. I had passing bedtime visions of Dear Guy, silently departing from the black pines as he slowly, almost timidly, approached the house to stare into my window at me. But I always thought, no, that doesn't make sense. I'm on the 2nd floor. He couldn't look through my window. He's not that tall. But the fear of his shimmering green spark eyes staring through my window did not lessen because of it. I could always imagine him growing in size to become a giant or stretching his legs to get to my window. I even gag a little when I think about that. It seems sort of funny that I'm remembering all this now. It has to have been at least 8 years since I last remembered him. And the fear that I feel about him is still fresh as ever. I'd laugh it off pretty easily if it weren't for where I'm living now. I'm sort of regretting that I recently bought a little modern cottage in the woods of the Lower Peninsula to work a job I really wanted. It's hard to find anywhere in Michigan that isn't forest or swamp, but I sure tried. It didn't bother me until just today, when after moving all of my boxes into the house and unpacking some essentials, I realized that I put my computer in a room with a big window facing the woods. I'm sitting, writing with my back returned to it. And this sense of dread, of being chased and hated and watched, is just overcoming me. I'm writing this primarily to banish the old fears of childhood and to put my stressed mind at ease. And if it gets a little notoriety on the internet, who am I to complain? It is getting pretty late, and I have work first thing in the morning. The moon is casting shadows on my wall, and one of them has antlers. A man stands on the corner of a busy street, holding a sign that declares the end of the world is near. It also curiously says that God has forsaken him and the rest of humanity. This man is Abe Samuels, former CEO and father of two. However, this week has opened Gabe to a new version of the hell in which he was living. A car wreck killed his children. His wife left him because she could not handle the stress. His company went bankrupt, and the bank froze his assets pending a lengthy investigation into the company. So here stands Abe Samuels, a man who sees the God in which he used to believe in as having turned his almighty back to him. As he holds the sign, taking his anger out on the cars and passers-by, a man approaches him. He wears a white suit and sports spiky blonde hair. "I think you're wrong," the spiky-haired man told Abe. "I think you're stupid. What is it to you what I believe?" Abe shot back angrily. "It matters a lot, actually. God hasn't forgotten you. What has happened was all part of his plan. He is only testing you. Like how your refrigerator broke this morning. This is all a test to reaffirm your faith in the Lord." The man smiled broadly. "Whatever," spat Abe. "Why don't you get out of here before I reaffirm my faith in these boots as having a steel toe? I have given up on God just as he has given up on me. Nothing is going to change that. Now go on, beat it!" The man sighed and walked off, turning into a dark alleyway. Something struck Abe as odd suddenly, he started to think about what the man had said and how he mentioned his refrigerator breaking that morning. He had not told anyone. And not just for the fact that he had no one to tell. "Hey!" he yelled toward where the man had gone. He tossed his sign to the ground and gave chase. He knew the man could not have gotten far. However, upon turning down the alley, he realized it ended in a brick wall. And the only thing he found was a pile of feathers. He took one look, went home, and began to pray for forgiveness. They say that madness runs in my family, but I would disagree. I would more likely say that my family, in its history, has been plagued by a series of grievously unfortunate events that took their tolls on the minds of my great-grandfather, my grandmother, and most recently, my father. It simply was not within our control. For example, great-grandpa Stephen wasn't always the sheltered recluse of a man that my mother used to tell me of. He was once a great role model and a brilliant biologist who womanized in his youth with his countless exploits of trips to the Amazonian jungles and Middle Eastern deserts that had amassed him a great wealth of exotic pets within his estate. But after his wife died, he became attached to the bottle and would lock himself up days on end, shouting to seemingly no one in his atrium full of insects and snakes. On the rare occasions she saw him, said my mother with a weak sigh, he rarely spoke a coherent word. He simply gibbered at his glass tanks, as if the creatures crawling within understood his every word. They say it was due to a drunken accident that he was found in his mansion, dead, lying in a glass tank, along with 5 fat-tailed scorpions. And then there was dear old Grandma Susan. I still remember when she would show off her marvelous sketches of the forest. I still remember when she was a sweet old lady that would bake us cinnamon and raisin cookies, rich with brown sugar, and straight from the oven so that they were still moist and hot. Of course, this was before one day she tried to feed my brother and me cookies with a fat, squirming cockroach baked into each one. I remember her protesting as my mother pulled us out of the kitchen. "They're full of goodness and sweet dreams and chitlin." We never really saw her again after that. No more trips to Grandma's. No more cookies. No more cockroaches. I don't know what it was with cockroaches. she started drawing those everywhere. I looked through her notebook during the funeral at her house, after she was found beside a bottle of powerful roach killer. They were full of elaborate drawings of cockroaches and peculiar writings about swarms and buzzing in her ears. I miss Grandma. But I suppose everyone goes senile, sooner or later. It couldn't be helped. She did look so calm in the casket, so dignified. She would have been proud to go that way. But my father, well, I'll admit I'm not too sure about my father. He was always quiet, rarely reprimanding, almost never saying a word. I don't know why my mother married him. I don't know why they bother having my brother and me, because they so rarely even acknowledge we exist. I never knew quite what to think of him. I loved him, I suppose. Despite everything he's done, I love him. I loved him when he put me to sleep as a child, when he gave me a rare smile after doing so well in school, and when I came home to find my mother and brother strangled and collapsed in a pile in the backyard. My father was nearby, playing with an anthill, watching the creatures run the lengths of his long, rough fingers. It's sad indeed, our family history. There's very little pride in holes where the insects crawl, because here, family and fate means nothing, as all that matters is feeding the hive, feeding the king. But I suppose that our unfortunate incidents were inevitable acts of survival of the fittest. Our great-grandfather was a mighty man, but even cockroaches can be squashed. And as greatly as they may try, those little ants cannot hope to escape the slaughter of the beautiful, invincible scarab. The claws and shell and wings and mandibles give me shivers every time I caress them. And that moment of tension where their carapace bends before it shatters beneath the tooth is exhilarating. Even in this soft cage, they still come to me in the silence to feed me, to give me a blessing from the king with feelers and legs and hooks. They say that madness runs in my family, but I would disagree. The scarab whispers otherwise as it burrows into my brain.